بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سمو الشيخ عمار بن حميد بن راشد النعيمي ولي عهد عجمان رئيس المجلس التنفيذي، أصحاب السمو الشيوخ، أصحاب السعادة، السيدات والسادة، الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. يسعدنا أن نرحب بكم جميعاً في مؤتمر عجمان لتكنولوجيا النقل في نسخته الأولى، الذي سيسلط الضوء على أهم الابتكارات والتطور في سوق النقل. هذا المؤتمر هو منصة لتبادل الخبرات والتعرف على آخر ما توصلت إليه العلوم الحديثة في هذا المجال. يشرفنا في هذا اليوم حضور سموكم ودعمكم المتواصل لهذا القطاع الحيوي. إن رؤية عجمان 2030 تضع ضمن توجهاتها تحقيق تنقل متكامل ومستدام، والذي يهدف إلى تحسين جودة الحياة. سنشهد اليوم ما يمكن لتكنولوجيا النقل أن تحققه في مستقبل مستدام وآمن في عالم المواصلات، وكيف يمكن للتوجهات الحديثة في هذا المجال أن تسهم في تحسين جودة الحياة وتسهل حركة الأفراد والبضائع. نتطلع إلى تبادل الأفكار والرؤى خلال جلسات هذا المؤتمر، والذي يجمع أكثر من 200 خبير وباحث وصانع قرار، على أمل أن تكون نتائجه خطوة نحو المستقبل. نترككم الآن مع هذا الفيديو القصير الذي يسلط الضوء على مؤتمر عجمان لتكنولوجيا النقل.
أهلا بكم في عالم متقدم جدا، عالم تحكمه التوازنات والتكنولوجيا المتطورة والآمنة. فمن خلال هذه المعطيات يمكننا توقع تكنولوجيا النقل التي ستكون في المستقبل، بناء على الحاضر الذي نعيشه، بعدما أصبحت التكنولوجيا اليوم هي العصب الذي يربط بين الواقع والعالم الافتراضي. أصبح العالم الآن بين يديك في أي وقت ومن أي مكان. ومع تقدم الزمن ستستمر هذه التقنيات في التطور، مما يتيح لنا آفاقاً أوسع من التواصل الفوري مع كل ما نحتاجه، ليجعل المستقبل أكثر اتصالاً وكفاءة. فلم نعد نقول ماذا ستكون تقنيات النقل في زمننا الحالي، بل أصبحنا نرى اختراعات جديدة وتقنيات متطورة تدعم قطاع النقل والبيئة بشكل يومي. من خلال هذا المؤتمر سنناقش ونتعاون بمشاركة الخبرات والممارسات لنواكب تطورات المستقبل التي نسعى من خلالها لتحقيق رؤية مشتركة لمستقبل النقل. مؤتمر ومعرض عجمان لتكنولوجيا النقل.
أصحاب السمو والسعادة، السيدات والسادة، نستمع الآن لكلمة رئيسية للدكتور أحمد الملا، الشريك المؤسس والرئيس التنفيذي لشركة أركات للتخطيط والتصميم الحضري، وهو شاب إماراتي وأكاديمي باحث في مجال التخطيط الحضري والنقل، فليتفضل مشكوراً.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. سمو الشيخ عمار بن حميد النعيمي، السادة الكرام, thank you for your attendance today. I realize that there are some non-Arabic speakers in attendance, so please allow me to give this presentation in English. My name is Ahmed Al-Mulla, and thank you for being here today, and thank you for trusting me with giving this presentation. I'm very excited to be here today. This is a quick outline of what we're going to talk about today before we start with this summit, because I'm sure you're all as excited as I am to begin with the main point of discussion. So before we begin, just a brief introduction about me and my background. I've worked in many different places, especially in government, and the place I spent the most time was at the Roads and Transport Authority in Dubai, or the RTA. This is just a snapshot of some of the places where I did my education and where I teach at AUS and Khalifa University. And I think the project that I'm most proud of in terms of my career was the Dubai Urban Master Plan 2040, which aims to make Dubai the best city for living by the year 2040. In terms of my experiences and my journey, these are some of the cities that I had the privilege of living in. And each city really led me to a different place in my journey. So when we talk about Dubai, growing up in Dubai was really exciting because you get to see a very rapid pace of development. This is opposite to Boston in the USA, which has a very slow pace of development. But when they do develop, they do things that have a huge impact. So if you can see in this image, they had an elevated highway that they put underground, and they reclaimed that space into a park. In Rome, it was very interesting because it's the first place that I got to experience living without a car. And I really learned to appreciate what it means to be a walkable city. And finally, Abu Dhabi. Through my experience in Masdar City, which did something very smart, which is they separated the transport from the walkability, and that allowed for buildings to be closer together and to have a very, very shaded urban environment. So being in Masdar, from my experience, was always 10 degrees cooler than the rest of Abu Dhabi. So when it's 40 degrees in Abu Dhabi, it's actually 30 degrees outside in Masdar City. But as an experiment, I think it was really cool with a lot of lessons to be learned. And the main lesson was that if you separate transportation from the city, you have a lot of benefits, but it's not really very sustainable over the long term. It becomes too expensive. So with that, with these experiences, we came to look at our cities, and we found that our cities really lack a lot of resilience because we import a lot of development typologies from outside. A lot of our cities are led by consultancies that are Western, that impose foreign typologies that are ill-suited to our climate and that will not be sustainable in the long term. And this is why RCAT was born. So last year, my partner, Fatma Al-Khayyat, and myself started a local startup consultancy looking at urban planning and design. And our whole ethos for this company was that we wanted locals and nationals to have a say in the type of cities and the type of developments that happen in our cities. One of our core values is, of course, reducing public expenditures. We want governments to spend less money in both the short and the long term. And every decision we make is backed by science and data. And this leads us to the interplay between urban planning and transport. So as an urban planner, I felt I have an obligation to the summit where we talk about transport and technology to discuss urban planning, because really a lot of the transportation choices we make are related to urban form. So these are two snapshots from the same city, but the image above, and they're actually the same scale, so it's 600 by 300 meters. If you look at the top one, you'll notice that it has a completely different urban form than the next. So the image above caters to 30,000 residents and more than 2,500 businesses, whereas the second one has 1,500 residents and less than 20 businesses. So you can instantly begin to see that the urban form and the shape of our cities has a lot to do with the impact of transportation choices that we make. So in the example above, because it has a very interconnected street network and the blocks are short, it supports walkability. Whereas in the second one, there's really only one way to move around, which is using a car. When we come to sustainable urban mobility, the best way that we can encourage people to use sustainable forms of mobility is actually to offer that infrastructure. So when we think of a street, we have to stop thinking of streets as being only one mode of circulation, which is cars, and start to think about offering cycling infrastructure, walking infrastructure for pedestrians, having dedicated bus lanes. And so the first step is always to offer this infrastructure. And in the top right image, you can see Copenhagen in Denmark. And in Copenhagen, 60% of people commute to work using bikes. And this is not a surprise. The city started investing in cycling infrastructure since the 1970s, which is why today cycling in Copenhagen is actually faster than driving to work. So I think for sustainable urban mobility, offering the infrastructure is really important, and this is step one that we need to tackle. When it comes to accessibility, cities that have good accessibility and connectivity, like Barcelona or Tokyo, most people commute without a car. So in Tokyo, for example, 80% of its residents go to work without using a car. And in Barcelona, it's a very similar proportion. And Barcelona actually consistently ranks high in quality of life indices because of its accessibility. And this compares with Atlanta. So imagine if you're in Atlanta and you want to move from one place to the next. As you can see from the image, you'll probably get lost, and it's probably not very easy to walk around, and if you are a pedestrian and you don't have a car, it's probably not the best situation. And to really end on this section, I wanted to talk about this, that a lot of transportation has to do with urban form. So this shows the urban form of Atlanta in Georgia and Barcelona in Spain. And even though they have very similar populations, around 3 million, and they have similar length of metro lines, about 75 and 95 kilometers, in Atlanta, only 4% of trips are made using the metro, versus in Barcelona, where 60% of trips are made using the metro. So I wanted to just end this section to say that a lot of transportation is way more efficient when we have a compact urban form. And in Ajman, we're lucky because our urban form is closer to Barcelona's than to Atlanta's. Global trends in transport technology, and this is the main reason why we're all here today. And I want to touch upon 4 global trends that I think are very relevant for Ajman. The first one is having an AI-driven traffic system. So AI is revolutionizing a lot of different sectors, and transport is one of them. In Singapore, because they have an AI-driven network system, what this does is it can analyze all the traffic in real time that's happening in your city. So imagine if an accident happened, the authorities automatically receive a notification and can dispatch. At the same time, if there's, for example, congestion on one route, it automatically diverts your drivers to use another route, and it can also be used to predict or forecast future routes for things like bus scheduling. Next, we have smart payment systems. Urban planners are obsessed with public transport because we know that it has a lot of benefits. And one of the biggest barriers to people using public transport is actually having to buy the ticket and waiting in line to get into the station or the public transport stop. So what cities like Zhengzhou in China or London or Hong Kong do is that they have face recognition to access the public transport, and that reduced or increased passenger entry time by 3 times. In London, more than 10 million daily transactions happen using this tapless form of payment, and you don't even have to use an Oyster card anymore. You can just tap with your Apple Watch or your phone, Samsung Pay, and you pay as you go. And in Singapore and Hong Kong, it's a very similar system that they use. And this actually makes your public transport more attractive for its users. EVs is another hot topic. And Norway is a global leader when it comes to EVs. And this is because the country started investing in EV infrastructure very early on. One of the biggest barriers to customers adopting electric vehicles is this anxiety or stress over running out of battery or not having enough charging stations. The way Norway tackled this is they have over 16,000 EV charging points. So wherever you are, any street you are, you're never in a worry of if I run out of battery and I won't be able to move. And lastly, mobility as a service or MaaS. In Helsinki, they have a MaaS provider called WIM. And what mobility as a service essentially does is it takes all of the different modes of transport that you have, all of the different payment methods and systems, and puts that into one app. So if I open my WIM app and put my start and end destination, it will tell me exactly where to walk to, where I can get a shared bike, where I can get on a public transport stop, where I can use a taxi or use public transport, and you pay for all of this in one combined app. And customers that use WIM in Helsinki use their cars 20% less. So it's really proven that this works in the same way that you can order an Uber with the same ease. With these global trends, there are some best practices that are very applicable, I believe, for Ajman. So I'm going to touch upon these 3 lessons because these are the secret ingredients to unlocking a lot of these ideas that we just saw. The first is, of course, public-private partnerships, like we saw in the example back in Helsinki with WIM. I think if you have engaged the private sector to boost innovation, this has a lot of benefits. And San Francisco was way ahead in doing this with a company like Lyft. And so once you have the private sector also contributing to your transport ecosystem, the whole city benefits. The second is having adaptive regulatory frameworks. This means that you're able to implement these policies at a rapid pace and not fall behind. And lastly, the importance of investment in research and technology. So in a city like Zurich, because they've invested a lot in transport research, their trams are actually 98% punctual. So for Ajman, we're lucky because we already have strong leadership. We have a strong vision and mission when it comes to transport. And everything we've just seen in terms of global trends are things that can be easily applied to Ajman. And the way to do this and become a pioneer leading tech-enabled transportation is through adopting innovation-friendly policies. Something like Dubai's innovation testing license, which is a regulatory sandbox, invites different startups to be able to test their technologies in Ajman. and this will attract a lot of innovative startups to the city. The second is the importance of investing in green and sustainable infrastructure. This has to be the baseline if we want to encourage people to use EVs and other modes of sustainable transport. And lastly, community engagement. So once Ajman adopts all of these policies and all of these advancements in technology, it's so important to be able to market this and for the public to be aware of these changes. And they did this in Singapore, where they saw a 15% increase in public transport ridership just from public outreach programs. And with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Your Highness, for listening. And I hope you're excited as I am for the rest of the talk on this summit. Thank you.
نشكر الدكتور أحمد الملا على هذه الكلمات الجميلة ونتمنى له التوفيق في المرحلة المقبلة. يشرفنا الآن دعوة سمو الشيخ عمار بن حميد بن راشد النعيمي ولي عهد عجمان رئيس المجلس التنفيذي إلى المنصة لتكريم الرعاة. الجهة الداعمة Global Mass Transit. الراعي الرئيسي OWS Auto. الراعي الرئيسي بلاتينيوم للأجرة. الراعي الذهبي مواصلات الإمارات. الراعي الذهبي كابيتال إكسبرس. الراعي الفضي تاكسي العربية. الراعي الفضي دهوة تكنولوجي. الراعي الفضي يونايتد ترانس فيا. الراعي الفضي او سيتي. الراعي الفضي نيم كارد. الراعي الفضي مسار لحلول النقل. الراعي الفضي AJ تكنولوجي. الراعي الفضي ماغناتي. الراعي الفضي هايونداي. نشكر سموكم على حضوركم وتشريفكم لنا في هذا المؤتمر، مؤتمر عجمان لتكنولوجيا النقل بنسخته الأولى. نرجو من الجميع البقاء في مقاعدهم لاستئناف جلسات المؤتمر.